The throne room of that Selari empire was vast and imposing, its towering obsidian pillars, carved with a history of conquests, stretching so high that the glowing orbs lining the walls barely illuminated the vaulted ceiling. The air was thick with the scent of incense, and the faint metallic tang of blood, a reminder of the countless warriors who had stood here before, some honored, some executed. The queen sat upon her throne, her 6 eyes gleaming with unreadable emotion, as she regarded the warrior before her, her voice low and sharp like the chime of a war bell. So the rumors of true formed a bond with the human. Her words slithered through the silence, sending ripples of unease through the gathered nobles as spined crests, flaring their tongues, flicking out to taste the tension. The warrior stood unflinching, his armor still scarred from battle, deep crimson slashes cutting across the dark chitin plates, yet he stood tall, his mandibles twitching, but his posture unwavering. He had known this moment would come, known that the queen would demand answers, but he had not expected the weight of her gaze to feel like a blade pressed against his throat. "You disappoint me, warrior," she continued, rising from her throne, her many limbs moving with the grace of a predator, centuries of war etched into her every motion. "The humans are reckless, chaotic parasites, unfit to stand beside us. And yet you, a warrior of the empire, have chosen to defy your own kind. For what companionship, mercy, or are you simply weak?" The murmurs grew louder among the council members, their elongated forms shifting, their armored tails curling in agitation. To bond with an outsider was treason, a betrayal of the empire's purity, and yet the warrior did not bow, he did not beg, he did not even look away. "I do not regret my choice," his voice cut through the growing whispers, clear and unshaken. "The human is not what we believe them to be. They are dangerous, yes, but not because they are weak or treacherous. They are dangerous because they do not abandon those who stand with them. They fight for more than survival, more than conquest. They fight for each other." The queen's pupils narrowed, thin slits of molten gold locking onto him as she stepped closer, the air around her vibrating with barely restrained fury. "You speak as though they are superior, as though they are worth the breath you waste on them. Tell me, warrior, what did this human do to earn such loyalty, such defiance of your own blood?" His mandibles clicked together, his claws tightening at his sides. His mind replayed the moment over and over again, the battlefield drenched in the dying light of twin suns. His breath ragged, his body broken, enemies swarming around him, their weapons raised ready to strike. He had accepted death, but then the human stood before him. A small, fragile thing compared to his kind, yet in that moment they were unyielding weapons, raised eyes burning with something he had never seen in any species before, pure, unrelenting determination. They had no reason to fight for him, no reason to protect him, and yet they had stood against the enemy, refusing to move, refusing to run, refusing to let him die. I asked them why. He said, his voice quieter now, but no less steady. They laughed and said, "That's what allies do." The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. The council members exchanged glances, some in confusion, others in disgust. None of them understood the meaning of those words. None of them could grasp the idea of fighting for something beyond power, beyond dominance, beyond survival. The queen's claws flexed, her breathing slow and controlled as she regarded him, her warrior, her soldier, her weapon. And yet now she saw something different, something she did not know how to name, something dangerous, not because of the human, but because of the idea they had planted within him. And now that seed had begun to grow. The queen descended from her throne, each step slow, deliberate, the weight of centuries pressing against the air around her. Her robes of woven obsidian strands shimmered in the dim light, shifting like living shadows. Her presence alone was enough to command absolute silence. The nobles watching, frozen, their crests pulled tight against their skulls, as if expecting the room itself to collapse under the tension. She circled the warrior like a predator, measuring, weighing, dissecting his very essence. The scent of battle still clung to him, the faint traces of human blood, mixed with his own, an insult, an abomination, an undeniable truth. Her voice was softer now, but no less sharp. "Forming a bond with a human is a violation of our sacred code, our laws, our very nature. Tell me, warrior, what has corrupted you so deeply that you stand here without fear, without shame, without doubt?" The warrior did not flinch, his muscles coiled with control. but not submission. His mandibles twitched slightly as if forming words that even now felt foreign on his tongue. I am not corrupted, I am enlightened. His voice did not shake, it did not falter. I have seen what they are, I have fought beside them, I have bulled beside them, and I have watched them do what no other species would do. They do not abandon, they do not yield, they do not betray those they call their own. The Queen's claws flexed, her movements ceasing for a fraction of a second, a moment, so brief that none but the keenest eyes would have noticed. Then she continued, her slow measured pace, her golden pupils narrowing to razor-thin slits. And yet you call them dangerous. They are dangerous because they will not kneel, because they do not seek to conquer or submit, but to endure, to rise, to adapt, to bind others to them with something stronger than fear. He took a step forward, his voice gaining strength. Our empire has ruled through dominance and bloodshed. We have crushed all who opposed us because they broke beneath our might. But humans do not break, they change, and they make others change with them. The murmurs from the council grew louder, some clicking their fangs in agreement, others hissing in disgust. The oldest among them sat in brooding silence, their thoughts hidden behind unmoving exoskeletal masks. The Queen's gaze flickered toward them for a brief moment before returning to the warrior. She stopped directly before him, towering over him. Yet for the first time in his life, he did not feel small. "You disappoint me, warrior," she said at last, her tone unreadable. "You speak of them as though they are to be admired, as though their nature is something to be embraced rather than feared. And yet they are reckless, they are unpredictable, their history is filled with war, destruction, chaos. They do not rule, they simply survive, and survival is not enough to build an empire." He exhaled, slow, steady, measured. "Then perhaps we have been ruling the wrong way." The chamber fell silent, the words like a seismic tremor rattling through the foundations of the empire itself. Disbelief flickered across the faces of the nobles, rage, confusion, fear. The Queen did not move, her expression unreadable, though the air around her grew heavier. "You are bold to speak such," her voice a whisper, yet it carried like thunder. "Do you believe they are superior to us? Do you believe their way is the future?" "I believe their way is different. And I believe their way is powerful enough to destroy us if we do not learn from it." His mandibles clicked, his fists clenched at his sides. "I have seen what they can do. I have seen their fire, their loyalty, their relentless refusal to die even when every law of the universe says they should. We fear them because we do not understand them. But I do. I have fought beside them. I have stood at death's edge with them. And I tell you now, they will not fall before us. They will stand, and they will fight, and they will make us choose between destruction or change." The Queen stared at him, long and hard, the tension in the room so thick it felt like the walls themselves were pressing inward, the air buzzing with the weight of history shifting, of something old and immovable beginning to crack at its foundation. Her eyes bore into him, as if she could see into the deepest parts of his mind, seeking the infection, the madness, the weakness that had led him here. And yet she found none. The Queen did not move, she did not speak, her 6 golden eyes, locked onto the warrior, unblinking, unyielding. The chamber was deathly silent, the gathered nobles frozen in place, as if even the slightest breath would shatter the delicate balance of power hanging in the air. The warrior could feel their gazes upon him, some burning with outrage, others with uncertainty, and a few with something far more dangerous, curiosity. Finally, the Queen moved a single step forward, so slight, so measured, yet it carried the weight of a storm building on the horizon. Her presence coiled around the warrior, pressing against his very being like a hand against his throat, and still he did not lower his gaze. He would not. "You claim to understand them." The Queen's voice was quiet, but it rippled through the chamber like a whisper before a scream. "You claim to have seen the fire that burns within them, that they fight for something greater than themselves, something beyond power, beyond conquest." Her claws twitched, her mandibles clicking softly, "And yet you still call them dangerous. Explain yourself." The warrior exhaled, slow, controlled. He had prepared for this, had played this conversation in his mind over and over. But now, standing here before the Queen herself, before the empire itself, he realized that words alone could never capture what he had seen, what he had felt on that battlefield, the chaos, the blood, the certainty of death, until the human had stood beside him and changed everything. "They are dangerous because they do not fight for themselves alone." His voice was steady, but there was a fire beneath it, one he could not extinguish. "They do not fight for power, for dominion, for survival alone. They fight for those beside them. They fight for something greater, something unbreakable. and it is that which makes them the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. The murmurs returned louder this time, some scoffing, some hissing their displeasure, their disbelief, but the queen raised a single claw and silence fell once more, her gaze never leaving him. They fight for their own, but so do we, she said, her tone laced with something unreadable contempt or intrigue. Perhaps both. Every species fights for its survival, for its people, for its future. What makes them any different than us and the countless others we have crushed beneath our feet? Because they do not fight with fear, he answered immediately. They do not fight because they must, but because they choose to take a step forward, his mandibles kicking. They forge bonds. Where others see only enemies, they turn rivals into brothers. They do not break, they do not yield, and they do not forget. The queen studied him, her many eyes narrowing. You admire them, she said, her voice colder now, sharper. I respect them, the warrior corrected himself, but I also fear them, because if we do not change, if we do not learn, then one day they will not fight beside us, they will fight against us, and on that day they will not stop until we are gone. A ripple of unease moved through the nobles, even those who had watched in silence, now shifting their tails, curling their crests, tightening. The thought of an enemy that did not yield, an enemy that did not break, was not something they had ever considered, because every enemy they had ever faced had shattered beneath them eventually. You fear them, yet you would bring them into our empire, you would stand beside them and call them allies. The queen's voice was unreadable, her expression impossible to decipher. You would see us change. After millennia of dominance, you would see us abandon the very core of our nature. For what? For unity, for survival. For something greater than survival. His voice did not waver. You say we rule through strength and dominance. But what is strength if it cannot withstand something stronger? What is dominance if it crumbles against an enemy that refuses to fall? We are the apex now. But for how much longer? Humans do not seek to conquer us. They do not wish to rule over us. But if we force their hand, if we refuse to see the truth, they will fight. And they will win because they do not fight alone. A heavy silence stretched through the chamber, the weight of his words sinking into the very foundation of the empire itself. For the first time in his life, the warrior saw something in the queen's eyes that he had never expected: doubt, hesitation. And then, just as quickly, it was gone, replaced by something colder, something sharper. We shall see, she said at last, her voice slow, deliberate. But know this, warrior, if your human fails, if your faith in them proves misguided, if they betray the trust you have given them, it will not be them who suffers, it will be you, and it will not be swift. The warrior did not flinch, did not react to the queen's words, though they pressed against him like an unseen weight. The gathered nobles remained still, watching, waiting, their expressions a mix of curiosity and disdain. The queen stood unmoving, her 6 golden eyes fixed on him, unreadable. The silence in the chamber stretched so taut it felt as though the very air would crack beneath it. Then, without warning, the queen turned her back on him, a deliberate slow motion as she ascended the steps toward her throne. The sound of her claws against the stone floor was the only noise in the vast chamber. The nobles hesitated, uncertain whether they should speak, whether they should move, until finally she reached her throne and sat down, her presence once again looming over all. Summon the human, her voice rang through the air like a blade slicing through flesh. Let me see this creature that has turned my warrior against me. Let me look into the eyes of this species that dares to weave its will through the minds of my kind. Let me see if they are truly as formidable as you claim. A murmur spread through the nobles, their crests flaring, their tails shifting. Humans were not permitted in the inner chambers of the empire. They were to be used as tools, as expendable creatures for the outer wars, never to be acknowledged, never to be granted an audience with the queen herself. And yet now she demanded one summoned, like an equal summoned, as if their words mattered. The warrior felt a strange tension coil in his chest, not fear, not hesitation, but something else, something deeper. He had expected resistance, had expected threats. But this was something more. The queen was not dismissing his words. She was testing them, weighing them with her own hands, measuring their truth against the traditions that had ruled the empire for millennia. He bowed slightly, not in submission, but in acknowledgement. As you command. The queen's eyes narrowed slightly at his lack of reverence, But she said nothing. Her claws drummed against the arm of her throne once, twice. Then she spoke again. Do not mistake my curiosity for acceptance, warrior. If this human proves unworthy, if they show even the slightest weakness, if they falter before me, I will not only execute them, but I will ensure that you suffer in ways no warrior ever has. I understand his voice was firm, steady, but I do not believe you will find them weak. We shall see, she said again, her voice laced with something unreadable. The warrior turned and exited the throne room, his steps echoing against the cold stone, the guards standing rigid as he passed, their eyes following him with barely concealed suspicion. It did not matter. He had already crossed the threshold of what was permitted, what was accepted. He had already been marked as different, as dangerous. As he stepped into the lower chambers of the palace, the dim lighting casting long shadows against the metallic walls, he found the human waiting, seated on the edge of a worn stone bench, their expression unreadable, their hands resting loosely on their knees. But their posture was not relaxed, not truly. The way their shoulders tensed slightly, the way their fingers curled inward, told him they were ready for whatever came next. So they want to see me. The human's voice was quiet, but not uncertain, not afraid. Yes, he said, simply, his mandibles clicking softly. The human exhaled, tilting their heads slightly, their gaze locked onto his, something unreadable flickering behind their eyes, the same thing he had seen that day on the battlefield when they had stood over him, when they had refused to let him die. Then let's not keep them waiting, they said, standing, stretching, rolling their shoulders like a predator preparing for a hunt. The warrior studied them for a moment, then nodded, and together they walked toward the throne room, toward the judgment of an empire, toward the beginning of something neither of them could yet name. The doors to the throne room loomed before them, towering slabs of dark metal, carved with the history of the empire, each etching a reminder of conquest, of dominion, of those who had stood against the queen and been ground to dust. The human did not hesitate, did not pause. They simply walked forward beside the warrior, their steps steady, their breathing controlled, their eyes sharp and alert. The guards stationed at either side of the entrance shifted, their grips tightening on their weapons, but they did not move to stop them. A command had been given. The queen had summoned the human. To deny them entry now would be treasonous, even for the most loyal of the empire's soldiers. And yet their bodies remained tense, their antennae flicking in agitation. With a final glance at the human, the warrior stepped forward, placing his clawed hand against the central sigil embedded in the door. It pulsed beneath his touch, and a moment later the doors groaned open, splitting apart with a deep, resonant hum of ancient mechanisms. The throne room lay beyond, dark, vast, the queen's figure barely visible against the looming obsidian of her throne. The human took a step forward, and the murmurs began, hushed whispers in the alien tongue. The nobles lined along the chamber's perimeter watched with narrowed eyes, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright disdain. Never before had a human been permitted in this sacred hall. Never before had one stood before the queen herself. The queen did not speak at first. She merely observed, her 6 golden eyes scanning the human with an intensity that could shatter stone. She did not move, did not gesture, did not acknowledge their presence. Beyond the piercing weight of her gaze, the air felt heavier, thick, with the unspoken tension of something ancient meeting, something new, something that should not be yet was. So this is the creature you defend, warrior. The queen's voice cut through the silence like a blade, sharp, deliberate, weighted with something unreadable. It is smaller than I expected, more fragile, and yet you claim it possesses a strength greater than any foe we have faced. Explain to me how such a thing is possible, how something so unremarkable could command such loyalty from you. The human did not wait for the warrior to speak. They stepped forward, their posture unwavering, their expression unreadable. You could ask me directly, they said, their voice firm, not disrespectful, but not submissive either. A ripple of tension moved through the nobles, shock, disbelief, even amusement flickering across their faces. The warrior himself felt a flicker of apprehension. The queen did not tolerate insolence, did not entertain defiance, yet she did not immediately strike the human down, did not rise from her throne in fury. She simply studied them, tilting her head slightly as though considering something for the first time. Bold, she said at last, her voice quieter. but no less sharp the humans always are, and yet boldness alone is not strength. You stand before me, a creature of flesh and bone, in a hall built upon the remains of species far mightier than yours. Tell me, why should I not crush you where you stand? The human met her gaze unflinching. You could, they said, their voice even controlled, but it wouldn't change what's coming. And what is coming? The queen asked, her claws flexing slightly. Change, the human answered simply, their eyes steady, unshaken. The silence that followed was different than before, heavier, more uncertain. The nobles exchanged glances, their crests twitching, their tails curling. The warrior could see it, the fracture forming beneath the surface of their certainty. The queen's 6 golden eyes narrowed slightly, her gaze piercing through the human, as if attempting to unravel them, to see the threads that made up their defiance, their unyielding will. You believe your kind can change us, the queen said, her voice quieter, now laced with something more dangerous than anger, curiosity. No, the human said, we believe you can change yourselves. The chamber was utterly still, the weight of those words settling like an unseen force, pressing against every soul present. The warrior watched the queen closely, watched the slight shift in her posture, the way her claws stilled against the arms of her throne, the way her pupils contracted just slightly. The queen was not accustomed to being challenged, not like this, not by something she had deemed lesser. A slow exhale escaped her mandibles, unreadable, indecipherable. Then we shall see, she murmured at last, echoing her own words from before, her gaze locked onto the warrior. And if you are wrong, if this human is nothing but another mistake, another fleeting thing that believes itself eternal, then it will not only be their life forfeit, it will be yours as well. I understand, the warrior said, and he did, because there was no other path left, no turning back, no retreat. The moment had arrived. And the future of the empire would be decided by what happened next. The queen did not dismiss them, nor did she command them forward. She simply sat there, her golden eyes locked onto the human, unblinking, unrelenting, the weight of her presence pressing against the air itself. The gathered nobles shifted their crests, twitching their tails, curling in silent unease. Some looked to the queen for confirmation, for permission to act. Others simply watched, waiting to see if the human would break under the scrutiny. The human did not break, they did not flinch. They stood firm, their gaze steady, their expression unreadable, their hands resting loosely at their sides. But the warrior could see it, the subtle tension in their muscles, the coiled readiness of a predator forced into unfamiliar terrain. They were prepared for anything, because they knew anything could happen in this moment. You say change is coming, the queen finally spoke, her voice slow, deliberate. You say that you believe we can change ourselves. Tell me, human, why should we? What do we stand to gain from abandoning the strength that has kept us supreme for millennia? What can your kind offer that we do not already possess? The human exhaled slowly, their eyes never leaving the queen's. Because what you have is not strength, they said, their voice calm but firm. It is control, it is dominance, it is fear disguised as power. You rule, because others kneel, but humans, we do not kneel, not forever. We stand, we rise, and when we rise, we do not rise alone. A ripple of unease spread through the chamber, murmurs, clicks of mandibles, shifting tails. The air itself seemed to grow heavier. The warrior could feel it, the uncertainty, the hesitation creeping into the minds of the nobles. They had never been spoken to this way, never been told that their rule, their empire, was built on something fragile, something that could shatter. The queen's claws flexed against the arms of her throne, her golden eyes narrowing. And yet you believe we should embrace your way, to build alliances rather than crush our enemies, to trust instead of conquer. She tilted her head slightly. And what happens when that trust is broken, when those alliances falter, when those you have lifted up turn against you? The humans smiled, a small sharp thing. We do not trust blindly, they said. We do not give our loyalty without reason. But when we do, when we call someone our own, we do not abandon them. We do not turn our backs on them. We do not let them fall alone. Their gaze flicked briefly to the warrior standing beside them, then returned to the queen. That is why your warrior stands with me, because he has seen what it means to fight beside a human, to stand together, not because of fear, not because of obligation, but because it is a choice. Silence stretched thick, unyielding. The queen watched the humans, studied them, measured them, weighed their words, as if searching for the flaw in their logic, the weakness that would make everything unravel, but she found none. The warrior took a slow step forward, his voice steady. When I fell in battle, I expected death. I had seen it before. I had watched comrades be left behind because they were too weak, too broken to continue. But the human did not leave me. They fought beside me. They carried me. When I could not walk, they bled for me. When I had no strength left to bleed for myself, he let the words settle, let them sink into the minds of those listening. What greater strength is there than that? The nobles whispered among themselves, their voices hushed, but filled with something the warrior had never heard before: uncertainty, doubt, hesitation. The foundations of the empire had been unshaken for so long, unquestioned, unchallenged, and yet now, in this moment, something was beginning to fracture. The queen's eyes flickered with something unreadable. She did not look at the nobles, did not acknowledge their whispers. She only looked at the human, at the warrior, and after a long moment, she spoke. Your words are clever, but cleverness does not build empires. She leaned forward slightly, her claws tapping against the throne. If we embrace this change, if we abandon the way of dominance, then what happens when another power rises to challenge us? What happens when we are the ones who must kneel? The human did not hesitate. Then we stand together, and we make damn sure that never happens. The chamber was utterly still, the weight of those words settling like a storm on the horizon. The queen's gaze did not waver, her expression did not shift, and then, after a long pause, she leaned back into her throne, her claws curling around the armrests, her mandibles clicking softly. "Then prove it," she said. The chamber remained silent, the queen's decree hanging in the air like a blade waiting to fall. The nobles shifted, their eyes darting between the queen, the warrior, and the human, some watching with suspicion, others with something more dangerous, curiosity. The warrior felt the weight of the moment pressing against him, the shift in the air subtle but undeniable. The empire had never been asked to prove its strength before. It had simply crushed all opposition. And now the queen had issued a challenge not to the human alone, but to the very foundation of their rule. "Prove it." The human's voice was steady, unshaken, their gaze locked onto the queen. "And how exactly do you expect me to do that?" The queen's mandibles twitched slightly, a gesture the warrior recognized not as anger, but as something else, something deeper. She did not speak immediately. Instead, she studied the human for a long moment, her golden eyes narrowing, her claws tapping against the arm of her throne. Then finally, she straightened, her voice cold and deliberate. "There is a planet on the edge of our empire, a world ravaged by war. One of our colonies was attacked by an enemy force stronger than expected. They have held the city for weeks, despite our best efforts to reclaim it. My generals believe it is a lost cause, that we should destroy the entire region and start anew." She leaned forward slightly, her gaze sharp, predatory. "But you claim that strength is not in destruction, but in unity. Then go take back the city with your human tactics, with your alliances. And if you succeed, then perhaps I will listen to your words." A murmur spread through the chamber, the nobles exchanging glances, their crests twitching, their tails flicking. Reclaiming a city that had already been deemed lost was a near impossible task. The queen was not offering a test, she was offering a death sentence, a way to remove this human problem without having to stain her own hands. The warrior felt his claws tighten at his sides, his mind racing. He knew the queen well enough to understand what she was doing. She was setting them up to fail, to prove once and for all that the human way was weak, foolish, that the empire's path of conquest was the only way forward. The human did not react, did not flinch. They simply tilted their heads slightly, their expression unreadable. "And if I succeed, what then?" The queen's eyes gleamed with something unreadable. "If you succeed, then perhaps the empire will have to reconsider what true strength means." The warrior knew it was a lie, knew that even if they succeeded, the queen would never willingly change the empire's ways. But he also knew that this was the only chance they had, the only opportunity to force that change from within, and the human knew it too. He could see it in their eyes, the calculation, the resolve, the understanding of the stakes at play. "Then I'll need a team," the human said, their voice calm, unwavering. "I choose who fights beside me. No interference from your generals, no sabotage, no restrictions. I do this my way." The queen's mandibles twitched again, amusement or annoyance. It was impossible to tell. "Very well, human, choose your warriors. But know this, if you fail, there will be no mercy. Your life will be forfeit, and so will the life of the warrior who stands beside you." The warrior did not hesitate, then we do not fail. The queen's gaze lingered on him for a long moment, then she leaned back into her throne, and so it begins. The chamber doors groaned open, the murmurs of the nobles growing louder now, speculation, tension, curiosity. The warrior turned to the human who was already walking away, their posture as steady as it had been when they first entered, as if they had already known this was coming, as if they had already accepted their fate. Outside the throne room, the warrior finally spoke. "You know this is a trap." "Of course," the human said, without looking at him, their voice calm. "And you are still willing to walk into it." The human finally turned, their eyes meeting his, their expression unreadable, but their words carrying something that made the warrior's chest tighten slightly. "If we don't walk into it, then nothing changes. And if nothing changes, then we've already lost." The warrior exhaled slowly. "Then we had better not fail." The warship cut through the void, a silent predator moving toward the broken world. Below, the human stood at the viewport, watching the planet grow larger. The warrior stood beside them, his claws flexing at his sides, the weight of what was to come pressing against his mind. The city below was already considered lost. Enemy forces entrenched, supply lines severed. The Empire had deemed it beyond saving. And yet here they were sent to do the impossible, sent to prove a point or to die in the attempt. The team they had assembled stood behind them, a mix of species warriors from the Empire, soldiers who had fought in 100 battles, and yet had never fought like this, never fought as something more than weapons to be wielded. Some had joined out of loyalty to the warrior, others out of curiosity toward the human. But all of them understood that this mission was not sanctioned, it was not expected to succeed. The Queen had sent them here to fail and to serve as proof that the Empire's way was the only way. The human exhaled slowly, then turned to face them, their gaze steady, their posture controlled. "We are not here to conquer. We are not here to burn the enemy out. We are here to take back the city without turning it into a graveyard. If any of you have a problem with that, speak now." Silence, no one moved. The warrior knew why he had chosen each of them carefully, fighters who had seen the cost of the Empire's brutality, who had lost comrades to its ruthless efficiency, soldiers who understood that victory meant nothing if there was no one left to celebrate it. They had spent their lives following orders, but now they were being given something else, a choice. The human nodded. "Good, then here is the plan." They did not fight like the Empire expected. They did not launch an overwhelming assault. They did not rely on brute force. They moved in the shadows, striking where the enemy was weakest, cutting through supply lines, disrupting communications, forcing their enemy into disarray. While the Empire would have crushed them beneath an iron fist, the human wove through the chaos like a blade of wind, turning the enemy's own strength against them. The warrior had never fought like this, had never moved like this. Battle had always been a contest of strength, of endurance, of who could kill the fastest. But this was different. This was precision. This was control. And as the days passed, as the enemy crumbled beneath the weight of uncertainty, he saw it. He saw the change in his soldiers and himself. The human did not lead from the back. They fought beside them, they bled beside them, they carried the wounded, they stayed awake. When others rested, they knew every name, every face. They were not a commander barking orders from a distance. They were one of them, and that changed everything. The city was not won in a single battle. It was taken back piece by piece, step by step, not through destruction, but through strategy, through patience, through something the Empire had never valued: trust. When the last enemy stronghold fell, when the last street was cleared, when the city stood once more not as a pile of ash, but as a home, the warrior stood beside the human at the ruined tower, overlooking the streets below. The people who had once cowered now walking freely, once more the soldiers who had once doubted now standing with something unfamiliar in their eyes: respect. "It is done," the warrior said, his voice quiet. The human exhaled, watching the distant horizon. "Not yet," they murmured, "because now we have to face the Queen again, and this time she will not be waiting with words." The war was not over. The battle had only just begun. The warship soared back toward the Empire, silent like a predator returning home. But there was no celebration, no victory cries, only the weight of what came next. The warrior stood beside the human, watching the stars slip past, knowing that every second brought them closer to the throne room, closer to the Queen, closer to whatever fate awaited them. The soldiers who had fought at their side moved through the corridors, their eyes filled with something that had not been there before. Understanding, they had seen what it meant to fight differently, to win without destroying, to stand together, not because they were forced, but because they chose to. They had fought as something more than weapons. They had fought as a unit, as something the Empire had never valued, something dangerous: loyalty, not to a throne but to each other. The human was quiet, their gaze fixed on the endless dark beyond the viewport. The warrior could see the tension in their posture, the weight pressing against them. They had won, but victory meant nothing if they could not make the Empire see. When they landed, the silence was crushing. The palace guards, waiting stiff, unyielding. The warrior felt their claws tighten at his sides. The nobles would already know of their success. The queen would already be waiting. The throne room doors loomed before them, and when they opened, it was as if stepping into a storm. The queen sat unmoving, her golden eyes locked onto them. But the tension in the air was undeniable. The nobles lined the chamber, whispering their crests, twitching their tails, curling. They had expected failure. They had expected the human to be nothing more than another forgotten name, another mistake. But now they had to face something they did not understand, something they could not explain. "You have returned." The queen's voice was calm, controlled, but there was something beneath it, something sharp and unreadable. "And you have succeeded against every expectation. You have reclaimed the city without destroying it, without burning it to the ground. And yet you stand here now as if waiting for something. Tell me, human, what is it you seek?" The humans stepped forward, their voice steady. "Change," they said. The murmurs grew louder, the nobles shifting uneasily. The warrior could see it, the fracture spreading beneath the surface of their certainty. "Change," the queen repeated, her claws flexing slightly. "You believe, because you have won one battle, that the Empire should abandon the way that has kept it strong for millennia. You believe that because you have proven yourself once that our nature should be rewritten. Tell me, why should we choose weakness over power?" The human did not flinch, because this is not weakness, they said, their voice unwavering, their gaze locked onto the queen. "This is strength, the strength to build instead of destroy, the strength to stand together instead of alone. Your empire is feared, but it is not strong, it is brittle, it survives, because no one dares challenge it. But the moment something stronger rises, it will fall, because it has no foundation, no unity, no trust." The chamber was silent, the nobles, staring, the weight of the words, settling like an unseen force, pressing against every soul. Present, the warrior could see the shift in their expressions, the uncertainty, the doubt, the truth that had been spoken aloud for the first time. "And you believe that by standing together, by trusting others, we will never fall." The queen's voice was quieter now, more dangerous. "No," the human said, "we will always fall, but we will rise again together. That is what makes us strong." The warrior saw it, the flicker in the queen's golden eyes, the crack in the certainty that had ruled the empire for so long. She said nothing for a long time, only watched the human, only let their words settle into the bones of the chamber. Then slowly, she rose to her feet, towering above them, all her gaze sweeping across the nobles who had once been so sure, so unshaken. "Then prove it," she said again, but this time her voice was not a challenge, it was something else, something deeper, something final. The empire would never be the same again.